Kia ora koutou katoa, nā mai haere mai. Welcome everybody. We have got lots of people joining us this morning on this very fine morning. I can see tons of people that I know and lots of you that are joining us. Please remember to pop your mics on mute. Thank you. So kia ora koutou, ko Esther Whitehead toku ingoa. Before we begin, I'm going to just chatter away whilst everyone's joining us so that there's not that kind of awkward silence and that space to fill. So whilst you settle, thanks for being patient with me. I'd like to acknowledge that today's session has a very specific purpose and a really limited scope. So there are many organisations, many iwi hapu, many Māori climate leaders, many community initiatives that are all doing incredible mahi in this space. And we won't be able to capture all of that today. This is a webinar that is simply like one window into a growing ecosystem and a really good opportunity to introduce you to some emerging players in that space. So I'm going to start us off with the karakia. Whakataka te ho ki te uru, whakataka te ho ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki e utu, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hiake ane te atekura, he tio, he huka, he hohu, tihe, moriori. Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you. Looks like it's slowing down now as we all settle in. Please remember to turn your mics onto mute. As we begin, I'm just going to start with hearing from you. If you could use the chat function, we'd love to see your faces as well, so you're welcome to pop your cameras on. We've got a wee question just to start today's kōrero. What is the most hopeful thing that you are seeing with climate action in your community right now? So it might take a moment, but if you can pop a wee answer into chat, this is really just an opportunity to understand people's sentiments. We purposely framed it in the positive, and it's really useful to us in the future to just understand, you know, what you're seeing and what you're hopeful about. So the purpose of today's hui is fundamentally about exploring how philanthropic funding in Aotearoa is serving tangata and te taio through climate and biodiversity action, and what each panelist is seeing in their mahi. The United Nations BioFin, which is Biodiversity Finance Team, stated that 89% of biodiversity finance supports climate goals, but only 22% of climate finance supports biodiversity. So that's quite clunky for a starter for 10. But if we think about it quite glibly and simply, climate finance asks us how we are financing the transition to a safe climate. Think emissions and transition. And biodiversity finance asks us how we are financing healthy, functioning nature. So the strongest investments can obviously deliver both and include an equity lens. But we should be clear about which outcomes we're attempting to make a significant difference in and what we're actually funding. To give you an example, here at the Funders Commitment and Climate Action, which is the work that I lead, we have funded several wetland restoration initiatives. And that includes biodiversity finance because it restores an ecosystem, and also climate finance because wetland stores carbon and improves climate resilience and flood resilience. So it covers both. So hopefully that kind of helps understand the framing in this conversation. We understand that caring for te taio and our environment is an enduring responsibility, and it's worth noting that many philanthropic initiatives stand on the shoulders of many people's mahi and kaitiakitanga and the generations of Mātauranga Māori that have been lived and practiced in Aotearoa. So today we have a lineup of incredible wāhine toa I'm really excited to talk with. And I'd like you to just please give us a wave as I say your name. I'd like to welcome and thank firstly Arohanui West, as Arohanui brings insights both from philanthropy, having worked alongside me at the Funders Commitment for Climate Action, and at Parakore. And importantly, today is going to also share insights from her hapu as Environment Manager. And also today we have a few emerging philanthropic initiatives in Aotearoa. If you can just pop your mics on mute, please. And you will have heard of some of these, I'm sure. So give us a wave. We've got Climate Foundation's Izzy Fenwick. She's got her camera off at the moment. We've got Climatics Pip. Oh, there's Izzy. Give us a wave, Izzy. We've got Climatics Pip Wheaton. We've got the Funders Commitment on Climate Action, which is myself and Rebekah. And we have Lani Evans from Fundsorter. So welcome, welcome. No mai haere mai. These have all emerged in the last 3 years or so. And while each organisation has a different role, we're all responding to the same growing need. And that's helping philanthropy and funding becoming a stronger force. In 2019, JB Where reported that only 4% of philanthropic funding in Aotearoa was directed towards the environment. This figure is changing, and this figure also has a few technicalities around it, such as how we code our funding. For example, environment and heritage isn't the easiest thing to understand when we try and break down and understand where funding is going. It does highlight why some of these initiatives have emerged. We want to grow this sector. Our signatories at the Funders Commitment on Climate Action are currently funding 17% of their total funds. As your hosts today from the Funders Commitment, we aim to grow climate and nature positive philanthropy, and we aim to socialise thought leadership, to strengthen connections and create spaces for shared learning. So today's Hui reflects that convening aspect of our role. And I'm going to be handing over to my wonderful co-facilitator today, Rebekah Hasloch. She's an intern and creative comms strategist, and she will introduce our panel and guide us through today's kōrero. And we have a strict time frame. I know I've talked for a while. That was just while you settled in. Hopefully we're all understanding the purpose of today and we can lead into it. So tēnā koe, Rebekah, over to you. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you so much, Esther. We are really fortunate, as Esther said, to have such a diverse group of leaders in climate philanthropy here to share their unique perspectives today. We just have 5 minutes for each speaker, and that's because we really want to make sure we've got time at the end for discussion and questions. So we'll keep intros really brief, and I hope you've had a chance to read the bios we sent around on Monday. If you have questions, just pop them in the chat and we'll come back to those at the end and cover off as much as we can there. I'm really excited to hear from our guests today, so I will just pop up a little presentation, which hopefully you can all see, or not. There we go.
Yes, thank you.
So this is our beautiful panel, and I would like to invite Lani Evans, the CEO from Fundsorter, to please start us off. Welcome, Lani.
Thanks so much, Rebekah. O kia ora koutou, ko Lani Evans aho. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Fundsorter, and we are a social enterprise that exists to make the funding landscape more efficient and more equitable, to provide data and insights for better informed decision making, and to make sure community sector isn't left behind as we move into a new technology paradigm. One of the things that we do is we maintain a database of funding opportunities that are open to New Zealand community organisations. And we currently have about 4,000 funding opportunities in our database that are all vetted and coded and tagged. And we use that database to support funding for communities and also to generate insights that we can share. I am by far the least knowledgeable person on this panel when it comes to climate change. But what I do have is a good grasp of what is being prioritised by funds across the motu and a growing understanding of where the funding actually flows. So to prepare for today, we did a review of all of the funding opportunities in our system that name the environment as a priority, and here's what stood out. Firstly, the environment is one of the most named causes in the country. So our taxonomy splits the environmental funding into 3 sections: climate change, biodiversity and conservation, and waste minimisation. And together they make up about 20% of all live funding opportunities in our system. It's the biggest named cause grouping in the database. So funding for the environment isn't a visibility problem. It's named by lots of funds, but that doesn't mean that there's a lot of actual funding available. If we look at the domestic environment, most of the money is small. Nearly half of the domestic grants cap at $10,000 or less. And of the domestic opportunities that tell us their maximum, because not all funders do, only 31 go above $50,000. So it is lots of small grants, and that means that organisations are forced to jigsaw puzzle piece funding together if they want to do anything that's substantive. It's also very much short-term funding. So like many of the social change and environmental change projects that are happening, this requires a long-term fix, but the funding is very much tied to financial years. Only 14% of the funds in our system offer multi-year funding. And more distressingly from my perspective, only 25% of environmental funds explicitly exclude operational costs, and only 11% actively invite them. That makes it very hard for organisations to hold on to staff or to move beyond that grassroots volunteer-led stage. And that aligns with a report that Marie Dool put out in 2024 that surveyed over 300 conservation organisations and found funding skewed towards materials, so traps and plants and tools, rather than staff time or monitoring and evaluation. She also noted that about 60% of groups were self-funding to stay afloat, so volunteers and staff were covering a lot of their basic costs. The international picture is better. We have 131 international environmental opportunities in our system, which is more than any other cause area that we track. The environment in New Zealand, when you take it as a whole picture, is one of the hotspots for international funders who often perceive our environment as unique and worth preserving. And international grants tend to be a lot larger as well. More than half of them are over $50,000 in terms of the amount of money they offer. It's also very much more focused on climate change. So about 35% of climate opportunities are from international funders. So it is also planting, not policy. In New Zealand, 5% of environmental funding will pay for advocacy. Internationally, that's about 32%. The reasons for that are varied, including funders' theory of change, funder constraints, which can be founder-driven or legislative, and some of it is also around a perception problem we have in New Zealand that fails to differentiate between politics and advocacy. Councils distribute over half of all domestic environmental funding. City and district councils skew heavily, about 42% towards waste minimisation. And for regional councils, about 61% is biodiversity and conservation. And it's quite a particular kind. So it's fencing, planting, waterways, pest control, sediment work. It's not species recovery or marine, which councils don't really touch. Councils also do have the lowest barriers to entry, which if you've applied for grants, you'll know you don't need to be a registered entity for most council funds, which opens the door to more grassroots mahi. That's what funders say. So that information is all about what funders describe as what they want to prioritise. We don't have national data yet on where funding actually goes that's any more recent than that 2019 JB Ware report, which was pre-COVID and an entirely different universe. But we do have it for Canterbury and the Waikato, and I want to use those as an indicator, not a national picture. And they're very similar in terms of this area. So environmental funding isn't underfunded overall. In the Waikato, the three categories make up 6.6% of dollars, which in terms of the different categories we look at is second only to sport. What is underfunded is climate. Climate receives just a little under 1% of total funding in both regions, and we're expecting that to be a pattern that repeats. Biodiversity does several times better. And I think it's important to know that Class 4 gaming trusts, which provide about a quarter of all funding to both of those regions, gave almost nothing to climate. There are some gaps and empty niches. Climate emergency preparedness has one dedicated fund in the country. Low carbon transport only has a couple. Urban greening, reuse and repair, stewardship and carbon sequestration only have about 3 each. So if you are a funder and you're funding into this space, fund multi-year when you can, fund operational costs and fund climate. And that's all from me.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lani. Great to see some good movement, but also it does look like there's some gaps. Now, the next speaker we have is Izzy from the New Zealand Climate Foundation, who are working to make some of those connections to close those gaps. So Izzy, welcome. We'd love to hear from you.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou, katoa ko Izzy Fenwick, toko ingoa, and I am the perfect person to follow that, Lani, as you have said, Rebekah, because at the New Zealand Climate Foundation, we are relentlessly and unapologetically focused on climate mitigation and specifically emissions reductions, which, as Lani said, is a seriously underfunded sort of part of this environmental funding landscape, which maybe explains why we're still hitting global record highs around the world for temperature. And I was just reading before this call about, no surprises, some more record highs from ocean temperatures in July in Europe. And if we don't want to keep seeing these trends going up, we have got to reduce our emissions, which is the mission of the New Zealand Climate Foundation. We want to unlock the 100 million tonnes of emissions that's currently standing between where we are today and the low carbon future that we all need. That number is essentially modelled based on the difference between our current policy projections around emissions reduction and the number we need to hit to meet our NDCs, the number determined by the Climate Change Commission reporting, which we think is a little bit conservative even, and we could even go a little bit further. So the good news here for me was when I was asked if I was interested in taking on this role as chief executive of the foundation, I thought the Climate Foundation, that could be anything and all things really. Climate touches so many things, but with a really specific focus on emissions reductions, it means that our areas of focus are the things that make up New Zealand's emissions profile, and that is transport, clean electricity, forestry, agriculture, and industry decarbonisation, all sort of tied in with the ETS. Those 5 big category areas also being the big kind of pillars of the emissions, the Climate Change Commission's recommendations. For me, personally, I just wanted to share that, yeah, for me personally, before we jump to the next slide, one of the things that was a little bit that I had to sit with before I took this role was I'm a nature baby really at heart, and biodiversity and nature and natural capital and conservation have always been a really big part of my life. My predator-free 2050 and predator-free in general kind of runs through my blood. So I felt a little bit conflicted at first about going into emissions and climate, but I know that every dollar we spend on biodiversity or conservation or predator or nature is at risk of being wasted if we cannot stabilize our climate. We have got to reduce emissions, stabilize our climate, because the extreme weather events that we feel, nature and the environment around us feels as well. And that is something I worry about often. So I just wanted to share a little personal bit about my journey in this space as well before I get into some of the nuts and bolts of the Climate Foundation. So the foundation isn't about owning the delivery of climate solutions in those 5 categories that I just mentioned. Next slide, please, Rebekah. We are also wanting to sort of be a connector, knowing that the Climate Foundation is not always going to be the right delivery mechanism for climate solutions. Sometimes having climate on the tin is not going to be as helpful, considering there are also economic and social benefits to these climate solutions, and sometimes those things need to be as front and center. So when we do work in clean electricity or transport, having climate in the background as an enabler or an activator is part of how we think about this. So we adopt connectors, we connect evidence and ambition, capital with solutions, science and action, strategy and partnerships. Essentially, whatever is most needed to help achieve our climate goals, we can kind of step into that space, enabling those that are in the best positions to do those things. I don't know where I'm at in time, so I'm going to start wrapping up, Rebekah. Just the one last thing.
You've got another minute. You're good.
Right. The only sort of last piece that I wanted to say was around the other big part of my job and the Climate Foundation's job, not just in activating these climate solutions here, is also funneling capital into New Zealand to enable us to do some of these things at scale. And as Lani was talking to, there is quite a bit of interest globally in New Zealand in this space, because New Zealand isn't just seen as an opportunity to decarbonise New Zealand for the sake of New Zealand. It's also a pretty important indicator for climate confidence. And if New Zealand cannot prove decarbonisation, if New Zealand starts signalling that this is too hard, that's going to send a disproportionately concerning message to the rest of the world about what is or isn't possible in this space. And that message is going to be way heavier than the 0.2% of global emissions. So we actually have a serious responsibility in the space, and our global peers want to help us with that, and that is all kind of packaged up in what the New Zealand Climate Foundation is trying to do. Ka kite.
Thank you, Izzy. So yeah, lovely theme there coming through about the need for connection to create the momentum that we need, which I think is a lovely link through to Pip from the Climatics to talk about a very different kind of set of connections that she's making. Welcome, Pip.
Thanks, Rebekah. Kia ora koutou, ko Pip Wheaton toku ingoa. Before I talk about the Climatics, I just wanted to share a little bit about sort of the why behind it. So I first got into climate change back when I was in uni back in the early 2000s, sort of standard entry-level stuff, getting people to sign petitions, dressing up as an endangered Australian animal, a quokka, if anyone's interested. But when it came time to get a job, I discovered that there were none. And so in my infinite wisdom as a new uni grad, I concluded that that must be because the scientists and the politicians and the decision makers all had it under control. And as I'm sure that you will be shocked to learn, that was not an accurate assessment. But what that inadvertently pointed me to has kind of become one of the guiding insights of my work on climate, that people care. But like when I experienced when I was leaving uni, figuring out how to best contribute and how to best contribute in a way that feels commensurate to the scale of this big problem can be really hard. I've now worked almost exclusively on climate for the past 7 years, much of it trying to tackle that challenge of supporting people to go from caring to contributing. So I'm here today to talk about something that aims to do that in the space of philanthropy. So I co-founded the Climatics last year with MJ Bethel, who I think is on the call, based on 3 interconnected problems that we saw. First, that piece about people caring, and how if one of the actions that you've identified as a good fit for you is to financially support climate action, just how hard it is to navigate that space and have confidence that your giving will have impact. The second is that there is so much brilliant work happening on climate in Aotearoa, lots of it with positive spillovers into things like health, community connectedness, cost of living, strengthening democracy, but that's all drastically underfunded, as we heard from Lani. It's nice to have some figures to sort of shape up the scale of that challenge. And then third, like Izzy was saying, the urgency of addressing climate change is only increasing. And so we decided to build a mechanism to address this, the Climatics. It's a fund that pools donations large and small from everyday New Zealanders and ambitious philanthropists that supports high impact climate work happening across Aotearoa. I love the way that Izzy frames the focus areas of the New Zealand Climate Foundation. We don't choose emission sources because a lot of community organisations don't either. A lot of the work that community organisations are doing isn't focused on a single emission source. So instead we focus on the way that the organisations we support are achieving change. So we fund narrative change, movement building, political transformation, and Maori-led climate solutions. All of our grantees are expert vetted by our incredible curation team, one of whom I think is on the call, maybe more, a group of climate practitioners who bring different perspectives and expertise to the decision-making process. And together with them, we each round, we build a portfolio. And the intent there is that we try and choose organisations whose approaches are complementary. So the collective impact of our funding is greater than any single grant on its own. I just realised, Rebekah, can you go to the next slide, please? So we're 1 year in. So far, we've run 2 rounds. We've raised $185,000 from more than 80 individuals. And those donations have ranged from $11.11 that's very specific, up to $33,000. Most importantly, we funded 7 brilliant organisations, and these are them. So you'll see here, Pōtake Aotearoa, All Aboard, 350 Aotearoa, Te Whale Tai Rāwhiti, Mindful Money, Coal Action Network Aotearoa, and Lawyers for Climate Action. I want to share a couple of things that we've learned to wrap up. First, there's more climate work happening than most people realise, more even than I realised when we started this out. So we kicked off before we even launched by mapping the ecosystem, and I was surprised that we surfaced over 100 organisations across Aotearoa who are working on climate change. We've funded 7, as I said, and each round it's really been a case of choosing between excellent and more excellent. So they are brilliant. The second insight I want to share is that those organisations are doing it really hard at the moment. Just like Lani said, there's so many who are kind of self-funding. We interviewed 11 for our last round, and 10 of them, entirely unprompted, said that this was the most difficult funding landscape that they had ever experienced. And there are also other headwinds. You know, there's political, there's the cost of living crisis, there's disinformation. So the third insight is that despite all of this, these grassroots organisations are punching well above their weight. And I wanted to leave you with one example. So there's a group that we funded, the Coal Action Network Aotearoa. These folks have been around for nearly 2 decades, and they're powered by highly committed volunteers across the country. And we're funding them to do a strategic piece of research on jobs after coal. And it's timed for the election, and there's a suite of collaborators who are going to be working with them to use this research to engage productively and positively about creating a just transition away from coal. We see this as having a credible pathway to emissions reduction via government policy. But more than that, it centres the workers whose lives and livelihoods are most impacted by the transition, a transition that's already underway. And so we see the benefits as being beyond climate. And I think that's one of the things that excites me most, is that when we solve for climate change, so often we're solving for all of these other problems all at once. Okay, I could talk about all of the other organisations we funded and all of the ones that we didn't fund in the last round, but I'll stop there and hand back to you, Rebekah.
Thank you, Pip. That's amazing. And I think, you know, you talked about those headwinds, and that's often what we hear. We hear about the headwinds in the media. So it's really great having those stories of the positive action that's happening, and that you can contribute from as low as $11.11. I'd like to welcome Arohanui West, who many of you will already know if you've engaged with the funders' commitment on climate action already. Arohanui, welcome.
Tēnā koe, o tira tēnā tātou I tēnei ata, ko waia hau, ko Kearoa te waka, ko Kearoa te tangata, ko tūhaurangi tēnei, ko Ngāti Whakau tēnei, ko Ngāti Kearoa, Ngāti Tuarā tēnei, ko Arohanui West tōku ingoa, nō reira tēnā koutou. Can I jump to the next slide, please? That's enough of my face. So I have the very pleasant job of summarising Māori-led environmental stewardship and philanthropy in 5 minutes. And I'd just like to say that I am by no means an expert. I see Jackie Forbes is on this call, and she should very much so be in my position right now. She is well equipped to speak to this, but the questions that Esther gave to kind of frame this kōrero is where funding is flowing, what's working well and what's not working. So we'll start with that as a starter for 10. For context, I used to work for Climate Action Aotearoa. Miss you guys. Left in April and started a new role here at my hapu Rūnanga and Aotearoa for Te Rūnanga o Ngāti Kearoa, Ngāti Tuarā as our pōtai, our environmental manager. So I am taking this from my view, from my beautiful little ecosystem in Rotorua, and PSGEs, our Rūnanga, our post-settlement governance entities are all different. We all receive different amounts of money, so you can imagine that it's quite a broad spectrum, but I'll try touch to what I can, but I'm by no means an expert. So let's start. I also think it's important to note, just for context, that in total, we've only received $2.7 billion in total for treaty settlements across the country, which is a pittance of what was taken. I think that's important to note. Researchers and academics estimate that treaty settlements only pay less than 1 to 2% of the actual economic and real estate value of the assets originally alienated or confiscated through breaches of te tiriti or waitangi. So yeah, we've got people at very much show different ends of the scale, but what I'm seeing, the energy and the pūtea and the people on the ground working towards at the moment is the electrification of our marae, which is really cool. We've seen our marae show up as emergency hubs, as community hubs, when there have been, increasing climate events over the last few years. We have seen marae really fill a gap. So it's awesome to see, that this funding is coming from our own pockets, but it's also coming from other streams as well. The Māori Climate Platform gave over 12.1 million to 77 different marae. So that's things like solar panels, Wi-Fi to keep people connected during these times of crisis. For us, for Te Rūnanga o Ngāti Kearoa, Ngāti Tuarā, we're geothermal hapu. We live here in Rotorua, so we're in the process of reconnecting our marae to geothermal energy. So that's really exciting. What else are we seeing? We're seeing biodiversity projects take place across the country, pest control, riparian planting, water and mauri monitoring. So we're seeing this beautiful blend of mātauranga and Western science. And, how do we utilize both of those tools to better ourselves and our position as hapu, as iwi, as whānau? Housing, I think we can't talk about climate justice without talking about social justice. The reality is a lot of our people aren't in stable housing. So Ngāti Whātua ki Ōrākei, they have rent to buy schemes where their people can rent their homes and that's actually paying off the house so that they can own it. We've got Papa Kāinga and Kaumātua flats, and they really hold up our marae. They fulfill duties like kai kōrero, kai karanga, ringawera in our kitchens. So those are so necessary to keep our marae afloat. These community hubs and emergency hubs, they don't exist at random. They are well-oiled machines and they need people to actually function. So if we can house our people, and better yet, if we can house them on our own whenua so that they can fulfill those roles, to me, that is social justice, that is climate justice, connecting people to place. Education grants, we have amazing experts in environmental fields. I'm thinking Tame Malcolm, Jackie Forbes, Lani Kiriopa, Nikki Douglas, Caden Watts, Tina Perot. They work across kai sovereignty, waste reduction, health, policy, biodiversity, systems change, and we have education grants. That's kind of like bottom line for Rūnanga. If you've got absolutely no money and you've got nothing to give, the one thing that you're going to give is education grants so that we can make sure our people have better quality of life. And we're also able to have that in-house capacity and capability to be at these tables and to make meaningful decisions for our future. And to me, that is climate justice. So probably looking at this at a bit of a broader lens. And also wānanga, to enable the sharing and retention of mātauranga. Mātauranga is a little bit in the hot seat at the moment. It's popular, it's a buzzword. But also we've got some internal mahi to do in our hapu, in our iwi, and in our whānau to actually bring that mātauranga back. It's not just you're not just born with it. That stuff has to be retained over time. You have to spend time in the tile to actually understand these things to have that mātauranga. So there's been a concentrated effort to bring this mātauranga back, and just the retention and passing on of this mātauranga through to the next generation. Next slide, please. So that's a pretty broad summary. I wanted to give 3 different examples of what's happening in the Māori environmental space. So I wanted to shout out Raukumara Pai Maunga, who I'm hoping many of you will be familiar with. I believe that they started out from the Jobs for Nature Fund. I can stand corrected if anyone else knows anything else. But I won't read this out because I'm running out of time already, but you'll see some of the awesome mahi that they're doing beneath their photo there. Parakore, kia ora Jackie, had to shout you out. So Raukumara Pai Maunga is biodiversity, pest eradication, hiring Māori, getting our own whenua to have these skills, partnering with DOC, all of those beautiful things. Parakore, supporting marae on the ground with waste reduction processes. Through Climate Action, Aotearoa's fund, actually, Parakore were able to implement 13 commercial composting sites at marae across Aotearoa. So that's diverting tons of food waste away from landfill. Tēnā koutou Parakore. Waikato Tainui, who they run their own taiao fund, which their hapu members are able to access up to $100,000 to set up a hapu environmental management plan, or to run a project to restore their awa, or to restore mahinga kai practices, which is restoring their ability to access food and share kai. We know that climate change is going to really impact our kai systems, so I think that's a huge focus for iwi hapu and whānau. And I'll stop there because I think I've already gone over time.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, Arohanui. So our last speaker is Esther Whitehead. Please, Esther, could you give us the perspective from the funders' commitment on climate action?
Now, Kearoa, thank you all. It's great to hear all of your insights. If you can go on to the next slide, please. So I'm going to be just speaking to where we're seeing funding flowing from the funders' commitment on climate action. Our purpose is moving beyond individual action towards collective change. So our signatories make up 18 organisations currently, and we invite others to join us. We play a critical role in supporting a TICA transition. That comes from the work of Maria Baj and is on our website if you're interested to find out more. One that not only reduces harm, but actively restores te taio and supports equitable climate solutions that are grounded in te tiriti principles. So our frameworks actually we try really hard to lock that actually into our evaluation process, which is really important. So how we measure ourselves is not just on emissions or not just on biodiversity funding, it's more than that. It's how we can hold ourselves up to a TICA transition. In 2025, our signatories directed over $32 million, which was 17% of our total funding. So I raise that because I think there's a lot more to be done, but our data is proving that we are growing that number from that 4% that was quoted, and our data for 2026 is still being analysed. So I just want to bring your attention to what the data is telling us. The TICA transition and climate justice is about 18% of our climate and biodiversity funding, and that's directed towards initiatives that are centering equity and are te tiriti aligned. They're going to communities that are most impacted by climate change. So this is significant because it shows that funders are not only viewing climate action as separate from people, but that it's a part of social justice. It's what has been previously spoken about. I will say that our coding is an art as much as a science, and I think that most taxonomies are like that. It's really challenging to describe something in a finite way. So what I mean by that is TICA transition funding in our coding could actually be, for example, solar panels on marae, because it was Māori-led initiatives that were led by iwi hapu that wanted energy resilience in their marae, and that has actually been coded in some cases under TICA transition rather than the next code, which is energy and emissions reduction. So it depends on the main purpose of our taxonomy for how we've coded it. The next one that I bring your attention to is the biodiversity, which we've talked about a lot on this call. It makes up about 52% of our coding. That was $16 million from our 18 signatories. And that's about reinforcing that climate action and nature restoration are deeply connected. Net zero is the outcome that we're looking for. Climate action and nature restoration are, the pathway to get there. So protecting, restoring our natural systems that sustain us is a part of that pathway. The last one here that I want to bring your attention to is an anomaly for us and was interesting in our findings last year. A really tiny amount is going to climate resilient communities. Now, you haven't got a breakdown of what these titles actually are, but there's a deep dive on our website and in our annual reports. But essentially, this is around adaptation. So it won't be any surprise to you that we are lacking funding in this, and both from philanthropy, but we've seen obviously a huge retreat from central government and DIA. And this is the bill that our communities face in this transition that we are currently living through. So we want to ask that question to ourselves of how we can better support communities to prepare, adapt and thrive. And many things have come up already, for example, in this kōrero, such as housing challenges. And again, I would say that we have housing as actually a huge area that we're funding, and it's not currently being put in this 6th code. So that's something that we want to dig deeper in our own kind of reflections and data analysis. If you can go to the next slide, please, Rebekah. So I really want to just shine the light on something which perhaps hasn't been discussed in this kōrero today. So the funder's commitment on climate action measures and evaluates the whole of organisation progress annually. We want to look beyond just grant making. It's really important to us. Our organisations have committed to decarbonise their investments, and we want to ask questions in these 5 levers of our organisation. So what does it look like to give nature and equity a voice at the governance table, for example? What does that look like in the investment space? Next slide, please, Bex. So we know what's working, and I've very simply and oversimplified with this wee diagram here that we've got some smiley faces, we've got some progress in some areas. We are seeing a growth in our grant making. Can we talk to that as impact? I don't know. We can talk about it where money is flowing. We are seeing lots of strategy refreshes and reviews in our organisations that embed what climate action and biodiversity impact looks like. We are seeing reductions in emissions in our operations, but it's worth noting that our operations in philanthropy are generally tiny compared to these 2 areas of investment and governance. So what's not working, or where are the opportunities? And I believe that the opportunities are still in investment and governance in particular. And we have a lot of work to do to kind of redress the balance of historic harms, and to understand what our investment portfolios are doing and how we can improve the governance of our entities. So just to say that when we look to holding a mirror to ourselves, this is actually the work we're doing. And the opportunity, we are essentially, a lot of our philanthropic organisations are asset owners, and they are investors that are using a dividend for good. And so this investment space is really important. And I think I will pass back to you, Rebekah. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So we have a few minutes just to recap basically on the themes of this call, which all of you have spoken to really beautifully, which are where is funding flowing, what's working and what's missing. So let's just briefly touch on those just as a sum up. The first, with where is funding flowing, if we can go back to the question we asked of the participants at the start, can I ask the same of you? Where are you seeing encouraging momentum building? Maybe Esther, do you want to start on this, leading on from what you spoke about?
Sure. So I think the momentum is building in how we actually measure data. We're starting at a low, I think, in terms of understanding the landscape, which is what Lani touched on. So I think we have a lot of work to do in understanding where funding is flowing and measuring that social return on impact and that environmental return on impact. I'll pass over to others that might want to contribute. Izzy, do you want to?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're seeing, where we're seeing some funding flowing, is into renewable energy, which is great. And one of the things that it has done is it's starting to push it towards not needing philanthropic funding as much, because as it starts sort of becoming something that governments have the social license to step into, and markets are starting to have the ability to intervene in the way that markets do, philanthropy can take a step back and start funding some other things. So definitely seeing a significant flows happening in that space, which is good, but hoping to see the flow not be needed so much in the future and start to flow into other places.
Yeah, amazing. Cool. So in terms of what's working, Esther, I think you touched on this a little bit when you spoke about the fact that knowing where funding is going doesn't necessarily mean we know whether or not it's working. But would any of you like to comment on this around what you think are having the greatest impact in terms of funding approaches? Looks like Izzy is keen to speak to this.
Or someone already said it, and I think it might have been you, Pip, or it might have been you, Esther. The greatest approaches is long-term funding, like when someone can give more than 1 year. Ka pai. That would be my biggest. That's the thing that I see has the biggest effect.
Yeah, I'd support that. So multi-year funding is where we're seeing, our surveys, our recipients are telling us that that's what they need. Participatory grant making is huge and growing. We need to do more of it. We need to do it better. But that's where our communities co-design what they need rather than jumping through hoops. Again, I've said it quite glibly today, but Pip.
Yeah, I'm fascinated that both of you instantly went to the how money shows up as opposed to the more specific around what's being funded, because I'm going to go somewhere similar. The thing that comes to my mind is what are the strengths of philanthropy? What do we know about when philanthropy works best? And there was a piece by WEF, by the World Economic Forum. I think it might even been a few years ago now. But they listed the different sort of ways, philanthropy is most effective when it's nimble, so when it can move quickly to where it's most needed, where it's being risk tolerant, so it's unable to unlock and de-risk other capital, where it's being flexible, where it's being patient, particularly on climate change. Climate change is such a long-term issue, and the ways that we can address it best are going to take time, right? So being patient. And then I think something that's come through really strongly in this call is when it's equitable, so prioritizing those who are most under-resourced in particular, and when it's being systemic, so when it's addressing the root causes rather than the symptoms. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a really great point, and probably leans quite nicely into that next question, which is around what's missing. Arohanui and Lani, do you have any thoughts around this, around what opportunities you think investors in philanthropy should be paying greater attention to?
I mean, anything in climate. When we add together all of those environmental areas, the whole of the environmental sector, from what we can see so far, is 6.6% of funding, which is an improvement from what we saw in 2019 of 4%. But again, only 0.9% of that is climate. So I think that is a real area of missing, but there were also some really specific areas that I mentioned before that don't have any funding going to them at all, or almost none, and that includes some of the waste minimisation pieces. That includes the decarbonising transport. It's things that funders or philanthropy doesn't seem to be attracted to, and yet those are areas that could have a really large impact.
I think that maybe something that's missing is that social justice piece, and some funders not seeing that being the same thing, the social justice and climate justice. For me now, working for the Rūnanga, it's quite interesting being on the other side of the fence. We are a small Rūnanga, so we don't give any pūtea out. We're very much so asking for pūtea in this space. So just seeing how hard it is. Oh my goodness, the funding landscape is really tough at the moment, and the need for collaboration, really, just to have more capacity and capability, and to support one another through, the peaks and the lows of this gig.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. I think it's probably time to move on to some questions that I've been seeing popping up in the chat. Michelle, are any questions there, ones that you'd like to table now? And I think there's probably more than we can cover, but we'll come back to those and find another way to keep this conversation going afterwards as well.
Beautiful. Yeah, Abby asks, actually, what could be a barrier for some of the funders in looking to support climate? Like, what do you perceive are a barrier for them? Did anyone want to speak to that?
Lani, go for it.
Yeah, so we do research on different kind of verticals of the funding sector, and I'd say some of the barriers for climate are around a lack of understanding somebody mentioned earlier, a lack of visibility. So it can often be harder for people to invest in something if they can't see tangible outcomes, especially when you're talking about something that doesn't have tangible outcomes or may not see a result for many years versus I can fund a youth worker for 3 years. So there's that tangibility and kind of touchable knowableness. There's a lack of understanding of what an effective intervention or good levers look like. And then I think the biggest one is really just that there is so much competition for the money right now. We have an economic climate that is really challenging for people. We have a reduction in the amount of coalface services being funded by government through contracts, and the competition is just really severe. Where do we put our money when there's so much need in so many different spaces?
Yeah, I'd love to build on that. I think you've kind of listed off some of the most important, Lani. The one I'd add is like the fact that all of the same cognitive biases, psychological biases that exist for climate change in any space exist in philanthropy, right? Like our brains make us want to kind of push it away because it is so big, and so we go, oh, then I'm too small, because it is so confronting to really look at what climate change is sort of posing as a threat. It's very easy to go, oh, it's too late, or what can I do that's going to make a difference? And so there is a piece around overcoming the psychological barriers as well as the sort of the practicalities around expertise and the competition and those types of things as well.
Thanks, Pip. I'd also like to just say that I think some of the barriers that we've found is that philanthropic funding tends to sit in regions and rohe, and so people like to be able to work within their rohe, and this actually can limit nationally scalable funds, which of course we need. So for example, one of the things that we've tried to do through our funders' commitment is we set up something called the Kaupapa of National Significance Climate Fund, and we've done that. This is the 3rd year, and we've committed multi-year large spend, so $2.5 million, including this year. That's on our website if you want to see the recipients. Probably not time to speak to them, but the barrier is trying to scale. Of course, climate action requires us to think bigger than our regions, although it's not to say that, what's happening locally is not cumulative, but nationally scalable, investable opportunities, I think, is where we need to move forward with in philanthropy.
Awesome. There's one other question, more from a grantee's perspective. I'm going to slightly paraphrase, but Ashley at Zero Waste asks, from the community perspective, how do you know what your funder is coding your work as? Like, is there a way that that's transparent, or, yeah, do you want to talk to that, Esther?
Sure. So we work, so the way that our coding works is that we developed a taxonomy, and then each of our signatories uses that. If the signatory that we are working with, so the organisation that is giving out the funds, if they're unsure of how to code it, they will actually speak to the recipient. So if there's a case where, it's not obvious, such as the example that I previously gave, they'll actually ask the recipient what the main reason is for that funding, what the purpose and the kaupapa of that funding outcome is, and we'll code it that way. It's something also actually that we can be more transparent with through our signatories, if that's useful. It's on our website, but it's probably internalized more than externalized, so that's perhaps something we can work on.
And there's another FCCA query, which is how can people on the call be influencing philanthropic funders to get involved and become signatories?
I think coming to events, reaching out to them, actually telling them what you're looking for, I think is really helpful. I think I realise it's a capacity issue because everyone is so stretched, but I think, I talked earlier about participatory grant making, and I think the people doing the mahi are you guys. It's the charities out there and the iwi hapu and the community grassroots people on the ground. So tell us what you need, and we'll respond. So yeah, do more of that, please.
And I think this one's for Pip, which is, Pip, how do you get philanthropists or funders to donate into your fund specifically? Is it shoulder tapped, or how do they hear about it?
It's been a bit of a mix. We sort of we were quite low key for the first round, and so it was sort of just getting the word out organically. We went a little bit more public the second time round, but it's been really quite organic, and we're sort of starting to have more and more conversations with people who, as our track record sort of grows, and as the community behind us grows, it sort of is gaining a little bit of its own momentum. But yeah, and it's usually has been exclusively individuals and no companies to date. But yeah, I'm happy to have a chat offline if you want to know more.
There's a few more questions, but we're committing to answering those back via email because we're just running out of time. So thanks everyone, and handing back to you, Esther.
You're muted, Esther. I thought I would just, before I hand back over to Esther to close us out, I just thought I would loop back to the question we asked to everyone at the start and put this to our panelists as well. If you could give us one word that you're left with after this session that leaves you hopeful, that would be a nice way to close out. Who'd like to start us off?
I'll start us with, there is the will to do this, so we can do it. It's not
That's
one word.
not one
sorry.
word,
It's
Esther.
not one word.
Will.
For me, connected.
For me, participatory.
For me, strategy.
For me, people. It's all about the people.
I love that. Thanks, everyone. Esther, handing back to you.
Kia ora, thank you all. Look, tēnā koutou katoa. It's been fabulous having you all here today. Again, I started the kōrero with the fact that this is just a window into an opportunity to meet with some of our leaders in this space. And we need a deeper wānanga. So if you'd like that, please say yes on the chat. Ultimately, the funders' commitment on climate action is about learning together. It's about measuring progress, and it's about strengthening the role of philanthropy. We're not doing it quick enough, but we're on the journey. You can join our signatory network if you're a funder and if you feel aligned. If you are a recipient of funds, please be in touch with your needs. We'll email the links of the speakers and their organisations, and I will close us today with a karakia. Kua mutu amato mahi mau tēnei wā, mana kitia mai mātou katoa, o mātou hua, o mātou whānau, Aotearoa. Apologies for my pronunciation there. Thank you all so much. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ka kite anō.
Mauri ora.
Mōri ora.
Ka pai team.